Morning again. So good to see you guys here today. We are in our second week of a series called Freedom. We've been discussing this idea of God, country, and deliverance. We had scheduled today to talk about getting freedom from approval. We were going to look into a story in the Old Testament with King Saul, and I was really excited about it, and we have been preparing for a while. Some events happened this week that were a little difficult to process, and I tried really hard to keep my message that I had prepared still on schedule, but as the week got further and further down this crazy spiral that we've been on, I really felt overwhelmed to talk about what's happened this week, and so I'm going to do my best to discuss some events that have happened this week and try to help us view them through a biblical lens. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, and so I ask that you guys give me some grace while I'm up here, because it's been a tough week. Everybody can agree to that. This week, we saw within a 24-hour period of time 2 black men shot by white police officers at close range. First one was Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge. We saw the grainy video. There was a second video that came. It was a lot more clear. It was an altercation between the police and himself. And the police officer shot and killed Mr. Sterling. It wasn't 24 hours later. I believe we all woke up to a video of Philando Castile in Minnesota, who was shot to death in his car. A black man and a white officer again. And the only reason I bring up race in this matter is because it seems to be relevant in our national conversation. I don't know if you guys had a hard time watching these videos this week, but I did. Mr. Castile, you could hear him dying on camera, taking his last breaths for millions to see. That sound has been stuck in my being all week long. I know it's a rough world out there and people die all the time. Some people would say, well, you just got to suck it up. It's life. It's short. People die. When they die unnecessarily, it takes a different tone. Within 24 hours from that, there was a sniper who shot 2 civilians, 10 police officers, killed 5 police officers. Brent Thompson, Patrick Zamarripa, Michael Kroll, Lauren Aarons, and Michael Smith all perished. The sniper was enraged because of the white cops shooting black men that he had seen recently. And so there's this racial tension that continues to brew in our country. And I don't think the best way forward is for us to ignore it and hope that Facebook goes back to normal. Cooking recipes and people's party pictures, Donald Trump saying Donald Trump things, that goes back to normal. But I don't know if that is the right way forward, right? And so I've prayed and I'm saying, God, how do I approach this? How do we step in this? And the only way that I know is to walk right into it. And so that's what I'm going to do today, if possible, by God's grace. I've never been a police officer. This is a job that is unbelievably difficult. If you think anything less, I don't know what rock you're living under. Not only are police officers in harm's way, but they are targets for the aggression of many. But I've also never been a minority in my own country. This is an existence that has undeniable difficulties, and if you don't think so, I do not know what rock you are living under either. Not only do many minorities in our country live in dangerous places, but they are also the targets for the aggression of many. We have been conditioned that when events like this happen, to be pushed to an extreme. The first extreme is to tell us that Mr. Sterling and Castile, we are led to believe that these are bad, horrible men that did and lived bad, horrible lives, that they attempted to pull a gun on these officers and they were forced to use lethal force. And that's how the storyline goes. Officers have a difficult job. I mentioned this. They have to make split-second judgments that I am glad that I don't have to make. They need to do what is necessary in every situation. The other extreme that we are given is that these officers are corrupt. They must have been looking for trouble. These are sadistic monsters looking for a reason to end someone's life that doesn't look like their own. These are the two storylines that we are given. And if you're like me, you should be raising your hand saying, hold on. I would imagine that the truth is some nuanced version in between those two polar extremes. Speaking of freedom, one thing you and I have been slaves to is public thought, the narratives that have been given to us. Narratives that I, for one, refuse to march to that beat any longer. I didn't know Mr. Sterling. I didn't know Mr. Castile. I don't know the officers that were involved in these two shootings. Where I want us to begin first is not looking for a place to fix blame, but by starting by taking responsibility. What have you and I contributed to this current problem? You say, well, yeah, Pastor Chris, I wasn't in the car. I wasn't out in front of the convenience store. I wasn't the sniper, or I wasn't the police officer that took these shots. I wasn't any of these men. I mean, I don't know how you say I can be responsible. No. We are responsible for where our country is. Maybe not directly, but certainly indirectly. Maybe we should start by finding how you and I can be the solution rather than how everyone else is the problem. Maybe we can start by discovering ways to fix the problems that are around us rather than repeating the tired old storylines that we've heard and have been given for years. The old stories of either extremes aren't correct. Not all black men are violent criminals. Not all police officers are racist executioners. We saw videos after last year's mess of this police officer in Atlanta would go and play basketball with the kids in his community. I mean, not all cops are bad. I mean, can't we all, isn't that agreeable, Not everyone who looks differently than I do is some hardened criminal that I need to walk to the other side of the street on. Is this the only two realities that can possibly be true? No. There has to be a way forward. If Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were reaching for their guns, they were attempting to end these police officers' life. If that was the reality, and I don't know that to be true, I wish that I was able to spend time with them. I was able to pour into their lives and express that not all white people are bad, that not all cops are the enemy. I wish I could have been part of the solution to prevent this from possibly happening. But that possibility is gone. These two men are dead. But I can find someone in my own city that I can do life with, that I can express the love of Christ with. If the officers involved in this terrible situation were these sadistic monsters that were looking for someone to end their life, I wish I was able to spend time with them just the same. And in some way express that not all people of color, those that don't look like you, are bad people, that they all have it out for cops. I wish in some way I could help them see that people that don't look like them aren't the enemy. I wish I could have been part of the solution in their lives, but I can't do that. The events that happened this past week are already set in stone. But I can find someone in my city that I can step alongside, that I can do life with, that I can walk this path of life with, instead of these two officers. So here's a question I want to pose today. How do we come together when the world around us is seemingly falling apart? That's the question that's been on my mind. What do we do? I mean, we can't just pretend this problem doesn't exist. We can't keep going in the way that we have gone. How do we come together when it seems like the world around us is just falling to pieces? The Apostle Paul in the New Testament, he traveled all over the place. We know many of the stories and the things that he'd done. Many years of his life, the later years, he traveled around until he was executed by the Romans. And during those travels, he went through countries where he was the minority. He experienced racism in many of those places. There was actually a time where he shaved his head as a ritual, as like a cleansing ritual, and he told the guys in Jerusalem this is what he was doing. And he goes into a place, and there was a riot happening, and these soldiers actually arrested him because he looked like an Egyptian. He looked like an outsider because he had no hair, and they arrested him as an instigator. They stretched him out, and they flogged and beat him because they thought he was somebody he wasn't. They judged him based on his color, how he looked on the outside. Racism was ever present in the first century world. Paul went to one place in the regions of Anatolia. It's like modern Turkey, and these towns of Derbe and Lystra and Iconium. He tells that on the second excursions into the region, he goes up into the northern area, and the Romans called this northern area Galatia. It was a mispronunciation of the word Celts, which was the group of people that settled in this area. They were considered barbarians because they didn't speak Greek. And barbarian is like a kind of a Greek blah, blah, blah. That's what they would say. These guys couldn't speak their language, and so they just called them barbarians. It's like, you're blah, blah, blah-ians. That's how they called them. It's totally racist, you know. Paul writes a letter to these churches in the southern region, and he calls them Galatians, which was offensive to these people, because they said, we're not these barbarians to the north. We're this educated version in the south. And he starts the third chapter, and he says, you foolish Galatians, which is like someone in England writing a letter to an American saying, you dumb rednecks, you American rednecks. That's what he would classify this all as this derogatory term. So Paul writes to these people, you idiot, you barbarians, you Galatians, it's all you. It was this racial term he threw out there. It was tense. It was a tense environment. He writes to them in this racially charged backdrop of us and them, educated, uneducated, the haves and have-nots, the privileged and the underprivileged. And he writes to them in Galatians 3, he says, look, before coming to this faith, you and I, we were held in custody. We were enslaved under the law. We were locked up until the faith that was to come would be revealed. So the law was our guardian until Christ came, that we might be justified through faith. Now that this faith has come, we are no longer under our guardian. We are free. We have experienced freedom. We're not under this guardian any longer. And he continues to write. So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you, I want you to see this key little word, three-letter word. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male or female. You are all one in Christ Jesus. One truth I want us to leave with today is this, that our freedom is found together, not in separation, not in us and them. There is no them. There is only us. Our freedom is found together. The closer we move to the cross is the closer we grow to one another. 2 volunteers. Somebody down, Dan Callier. Matthew 27 tells us this, of the time where Jesus is being crucified, the death of Jesus. There's a trial that's happening before Pilate, and Jesus is being punched and beaten, and he's got to carry his cross. They nail Jesus to this wooden cross. They nail him to it. There's insults being thrown at him. But in Matthew's gospel, there's this interesting mixture of onlookers and participants in Jesus' death. On one side is a criminal, and we both know about the two thieves that were on either side, right? On one side is a convicted criminal, a thief. He confesses who Jesus is, and Jesus says, hey, today, like when you and I die, we got like an hour left. When we're done, you'll be with me in paradise. There's this thief on one side who confesses and is welcomed into heaven. Our perception of this thief is one of grace. We look at this guy and say, oh, he made some bad decisions, but, oh, man, he figured it out. The last second, he did it. I don't know what he stole, but it must have been pretty bad. Maybe he stole a lot of things, but death was the punishment for whatever he stole. This is a pretty hardened criminal hanging next to Jesus. Later in the set of verses, we have this centurion. We know the other thief, he was a jerk, and he died, with nothing. Not you. You're somebody else. Later in the verse, we have this Roman centurion, one of the guys who was a part of hanging Jesus on the cross. I mean, if in this room we found out there was one of the guys who actually killed Jesus, he's probably going to have a hard time signing up for a small group today, right? We're like, yeah, we're all full, bud. We're all full. Like, can't, maybe their group. I don't know. Like, he's that guy. He's the guy, But we find this Roman centurion convicted about who Christ is, confesses the lordship of Jesus, and we find through history that he bows kind of to the front, in front of the cross, and confesses who Jesus is. This is one of the guys who actually killed Jesus. But we look at him through this graceful lens because of his confession of faith. A servant of the city and a hardened criminal, both at the same place of confession. A servant of the city who actually did something that in our eyes would be abhorrent. I mean, killing Jesus is terrible, but he's right here. And a person who's convicted of horrible crimes is still right here. And as they come together, take a step in. The closer they get to the cross isn't the closer they get to one another. And I take one step even closer. And you know what? I'm actually going to have you guys hug the cross. And yeah. It's as awkward as possible. It's good. A servant of the city doing the job that he was told, you and I would say is terrible. And a convicted criminal, everybody looked at with disdain. In a confession of faith, at the cross, they come together as one people. Together. See, our freedom is found together. It's at the cross is where we come together. It's not going to happen politically. I don't care what president is sitting in there. He cannot legislate heart change. And what we have is a heart problem. It doesn't matter what representative you have in the council and the Senate and none of that. We cannot legislate heart change, and only one who can do so is the one who hung on this. Our freedom's found together. So how do we move forward when it seems like a whole world is falling apart? The only thing I know to do is to fix my eyes on the cross of Christ and walk towards it. Because when I get there, on the other side is someone who doesn't look like me or act like me, sound like me. And they're hugging the cross just the same because they're desperate for something and someone to fix the problems within. This is the only way forward. Thank you, guys. You can take a seat. You're not a criminal, I promise. He's a good guy. The cross is the great equalizer. It's the bridge of all things. The closer we move to it, the closer we grow together. And this freedom cannot be discovered alone. It's found together. Paul writes to another group of people in this church, in this letter called the Colossians we have in our New Testament. And he writes about the same idea, just with a few different words. I will read it to you this morning. Colossians 3, starting at verse 5, it says, "Look, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, is sexual immorality and impurity and lust and evil desires and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived. But now you must also rid yourself of all these things, anger and rage and malice and slander and filthy language from your lips." Could I just say the one thing that appalled me most this week was people who confessed a faith in Jesus, who everything they said was full of anger and rage and malice and slander of someone else. No, we don't get to do that. When we said we're following Christ, we signed up for a different set of rules. I'll stop there. Let's keep moving. Verse 9, "Don't lie to each other, since you've taken off your old self with its practices. And you've put on this new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge and in the image of its creator." The image of its creator. Here, there's neither no Jew or Gentile, or circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian or Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Those three words should change the game. It doesn't matter how many people post Mr. Sterling's rap sheet. If he was a bad guy, he was a bad guy. It doesn't change the fact that he was created in the image of his creator and that Christ was in him. I'm not in any way questioning the judgment of the police officers. I'm not going down that path. I wasn't there. You and I weren't there. Someone will determine that. Ultimately, that goes to God's hands. All I know, I'm thankful I'm not a police officer. It's a crazy job. I have to make decisions that I never in a million years want to have to make. It's hard enough to love somebody from this distance, much less face to face. Paul says, look, in Christ, in the cross, because of this, there's no more Jew or Gentile any longer. We are so one together when we wrap our arms around this. There's no Jew or Gentile. There's no circumcised or uncircumcised. There's no barbarian and Scythian. Remember how distant they were like, oh, these people don't know what they're talking about. And he's like, no, it's not like that anymore. Because Christ is all and is in all. A-L-L. We are all one in the cross of Christ. There's this theological term called the Imago Dei, which is Latin for the image of God. We see in Genesis, God creates human beings from the dirt of the ground, from the clay of the ground, and he makes them in his image, man and woman in the image of God. All humans are the image bearers of God himself. The implications of this are massive. See, throughout history, you have kings and queens, including the Roman Caesars of Jesus' time, who confessed and believed that they were gods. They were the image of their gods. And this gave them the authority to rule their people, to declare what was right, to declare what was wrong, to declare what was law, what was acceptable, to declare who was slave and who was free. All it needed was a man sitting on a throne to make a declaration, and a whole race of people would be wiped out because they were the image of some god. The Hebrew narrative history is one that differs from all the other nations and the peoples of the world. They believe that God created every person in his image, that all people were made in the image of God. God speaks through Moses as they're leaving a period of time where they were under a Pharaoh who believed he was a god, an image of a god. And God delivers them from Egypt and sends them out into the wilderness onto the promised land. They are free. As they walk out of Egypt towards this land that was promised to them, towards the freedom that was ahead of them, God speaks to Moses and he says, look, you're not allowed to make images of me or any other gods. The reason being is that you are the image of me. You are the image bearer of God, your Creator. He imprinted his DNA on us. Generations later, Hebrew nations would have kings. They wanted kings like everybody else. Hey, Mom, they have kings. I want a king too. Hey, Dad, why can't I have a king? Everybody's got kings. So God says, sure, you can have some kings. Yes, that's fine. But the Hebrew kings didn't declare that they were the image of a God. They didn't fall into this temptation as other nations did, because they understood God is God, and we are all his image. I don't get to declare what is right and what is wrong. He's already spoken that to us. We just follow what he has said. So although the kings had authority over their nation, there was still a fundamental understanding that every person was created in God's image and valuable in his sight and in ours. God's imprint, his image, is on all of us. So there weren't any elite people. There wasn't any right to rule and declare what was right and wrong, declare what was valuable and invaluable. Every human had the authority, the ability, and the opportunity to create this reality as God did. Sadly, you and I, we don't create this reality much anymore. We don't use our authority and our ability, our image-bearing responsibility that God has given us to rule as he would. So we often create racism and division and destruction and war and deceit and abuses and power, corruption, greed, immorality, and impurity. We deny the image of God in others, and we abuse the authority that he has invested in us. The Old Testament ceases. 400 years pass. It's kind of like an intermission. Go out in the lobby, buy some popcorn. We'll be back with the second act. It's going to be awesome. Jesus steps on the scene. The image of God himself. The Word of God. He comes to earth to show us how to rule as the image bearers of God. He comes to show us how to use the authority, the ability, and the opportunity that God has invested in us to rule the earth that he has planted us on. And how does Jesus rule the people that are around him? On one knee, serving people. You mean like just on his spare time? Like even like just like on his weekends? Like is that what Jesus said? No. All the time. Like you mean just good people? Like just people without a long rap sheet? Is that the one who Jesus served? No. He served the one who betrayed him, that sent him to the cross behind us, which was covered in his blood as he took his last breath. Jesus washed his feet. He says, I've been given the authority, the ability, and the opportunity to rule as God was because I am the image of God, and so are you. And guess what? I'm going to show you how it's done. It's not done up here in a lofty place of opinions and conjectures and threats I can launch through social media. No, it's not done like that. It's done on your knees where you serve and wash the feet of your enemies. He said, this is how you rule. This is how the image of God is expressed to each other. This is how we should live. As the bearers of the image of God himself, living and serving and loving others, he shows us if we're to eradicate racism and disparity and greed, if we're to eradicate selfishness and depravity, we're to love tirelessly the unlovable and those who have forgotten the image whom they bear. Paul continues to write, therefore, God's chosen people, you, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. Bear with each other. How much bearing have you seen this week? Not much. It's easy to dismiss and threaten That's not the way of Christ. He says, bear with one another, forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Before you hit send, before you pick up the phone, I want you to run it through the filter of that verse. I don't know who was wrong. It doesn't matter. It doesn't say, hey, Chris, when you figure out who was guilty, then you can go with this. No. Bear with each other. Forgive one another. And forgive as the Lord has forgave you. And over all these things, put on love, which binds them together, perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, it's just us. You were called to peace. And be thankful. So I feel like Paul did that. He gave us a thumbs up at the end. Like, sorry, I'm kind of scolding you. You got to like it, though. Freedom is found together. The closer we move towards this, is the closer we grow to one another. There is no us and them. It's just us. And if you feel that there's an us and a them, walk one step closer this way. If you feel like there's this massive disparity and there's this us and them and they hate us and so I'm going to hate them and no, just kind of push pause on that. Take one step closer this way. Because this is all I've got to hang on to. Without this, none of this makes sense, right? Without this, I don't know how to move forward. Without this, all I know to do is just go buy a gun, arm myself, and wait for the war to come. That's all I know. Without this, I'm left to defend myself. Jesus showed me I don't have to. That's God's problem. All I am to do is to rule, to bear the image of God as He did, and live like everyone around us bears the same image. I can't look down on another person because they too are the image of God. I can't be comfortable with a segment of our society that is less than me, that has less than me, that's given less opportunity than me, because they all bear the same image of our Creator. That cannot be okay. If it was possible that one of those men were grabbing a gun to shoot a police officer, the fact, just take a step back for a second, the fact that he thought that was okay is not acceptable. Shouldn't we rise up and say, no, we need a re-education of our society? And say, look, it's not okay to act this way towards this group of people. It's not, is that not enough to frustrate us? He's the image of your God. And guess what, buddy? He's the image of your God just the same. It's not okay for us to be right here. We need to move forward. The freedom that our country needs is together. It's not apart. And the together doesn't look like me and sound like me and all have the same skin color as me. No. The together is this mixed group of people from all different nationalities and languages and skin colors. That's what freedom looks like. I think Bono said it, right? I see a kingdom come where all the colors bleed into one. Bono theology. It's good theology. Freedom isn't found in the extremes given to us by earthly rulers with selfish agendas. Freedom is found in the only King who has shown us the way to rule. And His rule is one through love and compassion and kindness and gentleness and humility and patience. You want to take back our country from those who ruin it? Take it back from those who are promoting division. Take it back from those who are comfortable with the disparity and the bigotry of our world. Take it back from those who are ruling through separation, prejudice, and power. Take it back by choosing the way of Christ. Take it back by walking in the way of his followers. Take it back by taking your rightful place as the image bearer of the one true God. Take it back by recognizing the image of that same God in those who don't look like you. Freedom is found together. Let's move towards the cross. Let's grow closer to one another. Are you moving closer to the cross? Are you trying to draw yourself into the image of Christ? A good way to tell is when you find yourself growing closer to others not like you. That's how you can tell you're getting closer to God. When those around you don't look like you and sound like you, and everybody's sight is just on Jesus because he's the only hope, that's how we know we're getting close to him. Jesus said, loving those who love you, that's easy. He said, even the heathen do that, like people with no faith whatsoever. They love those that love them. He said, but we're going to love our enemies. And we're going to count ourselves blessed when we're persecuted. We're going to count ourselves blessed and loved when we get to love our enemies, the people who are speaking out against us. If you, and I know not all of us in this room have signed up for this way. Not all of us in this room would say that we're people of faith, that we would call ourselves Christians or followers of Christ. And that's cool. I understand where you are. But if you have signed up for this way of Christ, you signed up for a different set of rules. You don't get to hate your enemies any longer. If we're going to follow the way of Jesus, we don't get to just love those who love us. We're going to love those who don't look like us or sound like us, those who hate us, those who would want nothing more than to see you wiped off the face of the earth. That's who we're going to love.